All right, good morning, everybody. I am going to let Jared introduce himself here from the playbook. Thank you so much for being here today, and the stage is yours.
Hi everyone. It's really nice to meet all of you. Thank you to Ms. Heald for inviting me for this opportunity. I'll tell you guys just a very brief introduction that I like to give for every presentation that I do about the SAT or PSAT or ACT. Like a lot of you, I grew up in an area with really academically rigorous public high schools. I graduated from an academically rigorous public high school in Princeton, New Jersey. And I'll tell you that because I know a lot of you obviously are tuning into this or 15, 16, 17 years old. If you had asked me when I was your age, tell me about someone who's smart or tell me about intelligence. I'm somewhat embarrassed to admit, but it's the truth. I had a really naive notion of intelligence when I was your age. When I was your age, and I promise this is relevant to what we're going to be talking about, if someone had asked me about intelligence, I would have said, well, tell me about that student's, weighted GPA, or tell me about that student's SAT score or PSAT score. And I've been in this field now for close to 2 decades. And I will tell you that exams like the SAT and the PSAT and the ACT are not, they're by no means, I don't want any of you to ever think of these tests, no matter how well you do, as barometers of intelligence or IQ tests or what have you. Ultimately, the qualities and the traits that will make you happy and fulfilled and successful in life. I'm talking about traits like the ability to collaborate with others, compassion, creativity. None of those can be tested in multiple choice format. So I just want you guys to bear in mind, because again, I know a lot of you go to schools where there's a fair amount of pressure, and they're excellent academic schools, but there's also a fair amount of pressure. I don't want you to ever view these exams, no matter how well you do, as exams that are in any way barometers of overall intelligence. The way that I view exams, like the SAT, and I'm including the new version of the SAT, which we'll be talking about momentarily, and exams like the ACT and the PSAT, is I view them as games. I really do. And to me, it's all about familiarity, learning how to take the test, and that's it, just learning strategy and content. So with that very brief preface, let me tell you what I plan to do for the next about 30, 40 minutes. So I'm going to give you an understanding of the brand new digital PSAT and SAT. As most of you probably know, the PSAT will be debuting this fall on October 11th, and the new SAT, the digital SAT, will be debuting in the spring in March of 2024. So for those of you who are tuning in, who are rising senior, or rather rising juniors, for those of you who just finished 10th grade and are going into 11th grade, a lot of you have been asking me at least questions like, should I take the current version of the SAT, or should I take the new digital version of the SAT, or should I take both? So one of the main questions that I'm seeking to answer during this presentation is whether you should opt, depending on what type of student you are, whether you should opt for the current version of the exam, which will be ending in December of this year, or whether you should opt and wait to take the new digital test, which will be debuting in March. Okay, so that's one of the main questions that I'll be seeking to answer during this presentation. I should have said actually that I want to encourage you guys to ask me questions. You can ask me questions in the chat. And as I say during every presentation in every class, I won't read your name out loud unless I'm 100% sure that you wouldn't mind my doing so. I don't want any of you to feel remotely self-conscious about asking questions or volunteering answers. So if you have any questions while I'm speaking, please type them into the chat, and I'll do my best to answer them and field them as I go along. In addition to that, I'm going to give all of you an overview of the brand new digital SAT and PSAT. And perhaps most importantly, I'm going to teach you certain strategies that you can use to ace the test. Okay, so let's dive in here. This is an overview. This is just preliminary information. So this here is an overview of the structure of the digital SAT. All right. On the current version of the exam, on the current test, you have 4 consecutive sections. You have reading, followed by writing and language, Those are discrete verbal sections. And then you have 2 consecutive sections in math. You have no calculator permitted and calculator permitted. That's the current version of the test. On the new version of the test, the SAT, the College Board, has not only obviously put it online, so for the new test, you'll be taking it using a computer or a laptop or a tablet, but even the terminology itself has tellingly changed. So on the current test, you have test sections. You'll never see the word section on the new version of the exam. Now you've got modules. So you've got, for reading and writing, what the SAT has done on the current version of the exam, reading and writing are separate. The very first section is reading, and the second section is writing and language. They're separate test sections. On the new SAT, what the College Board has done is the College Board has basically interspersed grammar and language questions with reading comprehension questions. So they fused those 2 sections and made them into one overall section. So you start off the new SAT and PSAT with 2 verbal modules, and then from there, you'll go to 2 math modules. So this is an overview of the test. You've got 64 here, 64 minutes, 2 32-minute modules for reading and writing, followed by 2 35-minute modules for math. Again, this is just preliminary information to give you a bird's eye view of the new SAT. In terms of the format and the functionality, again, this is not strategy, which we'll get to. This is just an overview. Here on the screen, you can see this is a screenshot. This here is a screenshot of what you're going to be looking at when you have the new SAT. And I'll tell you, as much as it pains me to admit this, because trust me, I would rather not say anything positive about the College Board and the SAT. So this pains me to admit it, but I will tell you that I do think there are certain really nice things that the SAT has done for the new digital test, okay? Foremost among them are the fact that you're going to have a built-in timer. Needless to say, timing and pacing is really crucial when you're taking a test like the SAT. On the current version exam, you're relying on a clock that's on the wall and on the proctor. On this version of the exam, the new test, you have a built-in countdown timer. And you can always hide that timer if it makes you nervous to see it ticking down. But to me, even that small little change is a nice advantage. And then also, you'll have the ability to annotate and to highlight text while you're reading. And again, that may seem like such a trivial change, but I promise you, that's actually a really nice advantage of the new digital test versus the existing exam. On the existing exam, all you can do is sort of frantically use your number 2 pencil to circle things and underline. But on the new test, you can use a cursor to highlight. And I have to tell you, even that seemingly trivial change, I view as a nice improvement over the current version of the test. So now let's start getting into some of the key differences, okay? And again, if you guys have questions, by all means, please let me know. So let's talk about some of, to me, really the salient, like the key differences between the current version of the SAT and the new, brand new digital SAT and PSAT. As many of you undoubtedly know, the new SAT consists of what are known as performance adaptive modules. So what does that mean in normal English? Here's what that means. When you take the new SAT, the brand new SAT, the very first section you're going to encounter is a reading and writing section. If you do really well, let's be optimistic, and let's say that you do really, really well on that test section. When you get to the second verbal section, the questions are going to seem much harder to you, much, much harder, because you will have aced the first verbal section. Conversely, if you take the first verbal section, so let's say you're taking the first reading and writing section, and I hope this doesn't happen to you, obviously, and you don't do as well, right? Let's say that you're just not performing as you would like to. When you get to that second verbal section, you're going to see that the questions are actually easier than the questions in the first verbal module, the first verbal section. So what performance adaptive really means in normal English is the difficulty level of the second test section, the second module, is dependent on your performance on the first module. That's true in verbal and true in math. And for a lot of students, that's a little bit of a difficult concept to wrap their heads around, because I've had students who've said to me, well, isn't that kind of unfair? Like if I do really well, let's say on the first verbal module, right? If I do really well in the first reading and writing section, and then I get to the second section and the questions are much harder, that's not cool. That's essentially like the College Board is penalizing me for having done really well on the first section. So here's what I can tell you. Unlike with the current SAT, where all of the questions are weighted identically. So if you get a hard question right, you get the same number of points as if you get an easy question right. That's the current test. On the new test, completely different. On the new test, there's an algorithm that weights the difficulty levels of the questions. So you don't actually have to worry that if you are doing really well, let's say on the first math module, and you get to the second math module, and the questions are really difficult, you don't have to worry that you're somehow being penalized for having done well on the first math module or the first verbal module. The difficulty level of the questions are weighted. It's a more sophisticated scoring process than on the current test, where it's a basic one-to-one of the number of questions that you get right. So again, one of the, to me, arguably the key difference between the current test and the new test is that adaptivity, the adaptive nature of the exam, where again, the difficulty level of the questions that you encounter in the second verbal section and in the second math section is predicated on, it's dependent on your performance on the first module, okay? In addition to that, the new digital SAT, and this should be welcome news to all of you, is significantly shorter than the current test, okay? To me, one of the hardest things about the SAT in general is really having the ability to focus for a few hours of time. The way that I view preparing for the SAT in part, it's really about building your mental endurance, your wherewithal, as if, I know some of you undoubtedly are athletes, as if you're building up your wind when it comes to sports like track and field or soccer. When you take the SAT, if you take the current exam, it's 3 hours. That's significantly longer than any test you take at school. So in order to do well, you have to have that mental stamina, that wherewithal. You have to be able to stay sharp and focus for 3 hours at a time. On the new SAT, the good news is for the digital test, the new SAT and PSAT, the test is significantly shorter. It's still longer than most tests that you're accustomed to, but it's significantly longer than the current version of the exam. Again, the current test is 3 hours. The new test is 2 hours and 14 minutes. And you know what? That 46 minutes difference is really significant when you think about 2 hours and 14 minutes versus 3 hours. The other thing that I want to point out, and this should be welcome news to all of you who maybe feel a little bit apprehensive about math, or maybe you're just deliberate and you like to think about math problems and be methodical, you have more time per question. You have more time per question on the new digital SAT for math than you do on the current SAT, which again should be welcome news for all of you. And then this year, this to me is arguably actually the greatest difference between the current version of the exam and the new test. So the digital SAT's reading passages are significantly shorter. I wouldn't necessarily say easier, but certainly shorter than the current test's reading passages. So let's talk about this here. So here on the screen, what I've done is I've given you a screenshot, and here's the deal. I couldn't even fit this. This is an actual reading passage or set of passages from the current SAT. And as you can tell, I could not even, I'd have to have shrunk this down, right? I couldn't even get these paired passages onto a slide for this presentation. And for those of you who are familiar with the current version of the exam, the reading passages are very lengthy. They tend to be quite tedious and quite dull. And I say that as someone who is an English major, okay? I was an English major at school. I love to read, but I don't want to lie to you guys. I would often rather see that this wallpaper in back of me here, I would rather stare at this wall for about 10 minutes than to read most of the passages that are on the current version of the SAT. So it's not as if I'm reading these passages and thinking like, yes, I get to read about microscopic fungus growth or whatever. I don't want to read these any more than any of you probably do. So here's the good news. Again, on the current version of the SAT, you've got these very lengthy passages like this here, this set of passages, and you have anywhere from 10 to 12 multiple choice questions that follow each passage. On the new version of the SAT, you don't. In fact, the new SAT and PSAT don't even use the term passage. Instead, the College Board has replaced the term passage with the term text. And that's a semantic change, but again, it's very telling. What the SAT is essentially saying is there are no more passages. When you take the new digital test, you're going to have short, like little blurbs of text. They might be excerpts from scientific articles, journals, or works of fiction, or even poetry, which we'll talk about momentarily. And instead of having 10 or 12 multiple choice questions following each text, you'll only have one. So the way that I view it, the new SAT, the digital SAT and PSAT's reading section, reading and writing section, it's not a mental marathon. It's not this grueling marathon where you feel that you're just sort of slogging through this swamp and you're just doing everything possible to maintain focus. Rather, I view the verbal sections of the new SAT and PSAT as a series of sprints. So not a marathon, but a series of sprints. One blurb of text and one corresponding question. So let's talk about some strategies. So this is what I really think is perhaps the most important part of this morning's presentation. I'm going to be focusing on strategies to really give you an idea. One of you is asking me a question here. Will this year's seniors take the digital SAT? The answer is no. So for this year's seniors, you are taking the current version of the SAT, not the digital version of the exam, the current version of the exam. But thank you for that question. So to me, arguably, the most important skill that you're going to want to develop, that you're going to want to build up, is being able to ascertain the main idea of the text, to really quickly pinpoint a passage's main idea. So I'm going to jump over this here, and let's do this together. So let me jump over this. We'll come back to that. And give me 1 second here. And let's start off with a text here. I'm going to read this out loud and we'll do the corresponding question together. Let's start off with a text that's sort of a easy to medium degree difficulty question. Okay, so I'm going to read this out loud and I'd like you guys to follow along with me, and we'll start talking about what to look for and how to very quickly differentiate among the answer choices. So this one reads, the following text is adapted from Frances Hodgson Burnett's 1911 novel, The Secret Garden. Mary, a young girl, recently found an overgrown hidden garden. Mary was an odd, determined little person, and now she had something interesting to be determined about. She was very much absorbed indeed. She worked and dug and pulled up weeds steadily, only becoming more pleased with her work every hour instead of tiring of it. It seemed to her like a fascinating sort of play. So before we get to the corresponding question on the right, here's the deal. When you read an excerpt from a work of fiction on the new SAT, or quite frankly, on the existing SAT or on the ACT, when I'm reading an excerpt from a novel or a short story, what I'm trying to figure out immediately are just a few things. I'm trying to figure out as much information as possible about the main character, about the protagonist. What I'm really trying to figure out is basically what's the deal. All main characters, if you ever take a class on writing, let's say maybe in high school or in college, what you'll find out is that all main characters have certain traits, right? They have defining traits. And all main characters also have desires, they have wants, they have objectives and goals, right? They're not just inert. They might have a desire to win a race or a desire to, maybe have a certain romantic partner, whatever that desire is. All main characters share some ambition or desire. And that's true whether you're reading a passage on the SAT, whether you're watching a show on like Netflix, or even sometimes a video on TikTok. So for this here, right, what do we have? We have this girl, Mary, and what does she like to do? Well, according to the passage, she seems to like to dig up weeds, right? Personally, I'm not into that, but whatever, that's her thing. So let's check out the corresponding question here. It says, which choice best states the main idea of the text? Most of your questions for reading on the new digital SAT will be about the main idea or primary purpose of the text. Not all, but the vast majority. So let's go through these answer choices. Let's look at choice A. Choice A says, I'm going to do a little bit of highlighting here. Choice A says that Mary hides in the garden. I'm going to put that part here in yellow. And then the rest of the answer choice I'll put in green says to avoid doing her chores. So I want you guys to tell me, based on the text that I just read out loud, which part of choice A is correct? The part that's in yellow or the part that's in green? What do you guys think? The part that's in yellow, and you can put your answer into the chat. What do you think is correct? The part that's in yellow or the part that's in green? Which part is supported by the text? I'll give you guys a moment. Yeah, exactly. Really good. The part that's in yellow, right? The part that's in yellow, that's the part that's supported by that. So why am I bringing that out? I'm bringing that out because one thing that I think is so valuable for you to be aware of is how the people who write these exams try to get otherwise really smart students to pick incorrect answers. If you think about it from their perspective, that's not easy, right? It's not easy to get a good student to pick an incorrect answer choice when it comes to reading. So how do the people who write these exams, many of whom I've hired over the years to consult for me, how do they do so? Well, there are a few types of incorrect answer choices that you're going to see on the test, okay? So we're going to talk here, we're going to take a little bit of a detour and then come back to that passage. And we're going to learn how the people who write the SAT are going to try to trick you into picking so-called trap answers so you can avoid falling for them, okay? So these here are the three most devious and most common types of trap answers on the exams. You have answer choices that seem totally logical, totally plausible, but are in no way supported by the source text. So it doesn't matter how logical the answer sounds, if you can't find evidence within the text, you cannot pick that answer choice. I used to do a lot of tutoring, meaning one-on-one tutoring. I really don't do that anymore. I primarily teach large classes, but when I would tutor students, oftentimes, a student would say, I think the answer choice is C. And I would say to that student, okay, can you show me in the text, where does it show you? What are the lines that support answer choice C? And here's what would invariably happen. The student would start skimming the text and he or she or they would say, well, I don't see anything. And I would say, okay, well, is there any evidence whatsoever in the text that supports, let's say, answer choice C? And again, what that student would invariably say to me is, well, I don't see anything, but couldn't it be true that, or doesn't it make sense that? And I promise you, and if you take away one thing from this presentation, let it be this. If you try to justify picking an answer choice on the new SAT or current test for reading by saying something in your mind like, well, couldn't it be true that, or doesn't it make sense that? I promise you, you are picking a wrong answer, not 99% of the time, but 100% of the time. You should be able to draw an arrow from your answer choice to the part of the passage or text that substantiates that answer. If you cannot do so, no matter how logical that answer choice sounds, no matter how appealing, it is a wrong answer. It's a type of answer choice that the people who write this exam call, and I'm not making this up, this is not my acronym, this is theirs. They call those acronyms SGNM. Those are answer choices that sound good, but are not mentioned anywhere in the text. Sounds good, not mentioned. Other choices, and we just saw this with choice A, are answer choices that are part right and part wrong. And uncreatively, the people who write this exam use this acronym for those answer choices. They call those answers PRPW. Those are answers that are part right and part wrong. And then you also have answers that are technically true, and we'll get to these a little bit later, but don't reflect the main idea of the passage. So let's go back and let's talk about answers that are part right and part wrong. Let me go back to that. Give me 1 second here. Okay, so let's go back, right? So look at choice A. Choice A is a prime example of an answer choice that is part right and part wrong. And the people who write the SAT, they have certain terms that they use for incorrect answer choices. And they're very revealing. They don't call wrong answers wrong answers. They don't call wrong answers trap answers, incorrect answers. The people who write the test questions that you're going to take, whether you take the new digital SAT or the PSAT or the SAT that's currently in currency that's currently out there. Whichever version of the exam you take, the incorrect answer choices, the people who write the exam call them decoys and distractors. And I want you to think about that for just a moment, right? Think about those terms. Think about what a decoy is. Think about the connotation of words like decoy and distractor. What are the people who write this test trying to do? They're trying to divert your attention from the correct answer that they call the key to one of the three decoy answers. And if that sounds kind of evil to you, I agree, it is, right? So how can you outsmart them? How can you do well on this test? Well, a lot of it comes down to familiarity, to understanding the types of decoys and incorrect answer choices that you're going to see every time, which again, you can see here, choice A is a prime example of an answer that is part right and part wrong. I always tell students, the split second you get to any part of an answer choice that's incorrect, that's not mentioned in the text, or even worse, is contradicted by the text, you have to get rid of that choice immediately. Let's go to choice B, right? Look at choice B. I would get rid of choice B immediately. As soon as I read Mary is getting bored with pulling up weeds, I get rid of that choice. Why? Because here that's directly contradicted by the text that tells us that she's having a good time. You know what? I'd probably get bored. I don't want to sit in the garden all day, pulling up weeds. That sounds like a chore to me, but it isn't a chore to Mary. And choice B is contradicted by the text, right? Look at choice C. Mary is clearing out the garden to create a space to play. So choice C, again, is part right and part wrong. Is it true that Mary is clearing out the garden? Yes, she is. Is there any indication that she's creating a space to play? No. Maybe she is. Maybe the next page says that she is, but not the text that I'm looking at here. Therefore, choice C is also a prime example of an answer that's part right and part wrong. And then we have here choice D, which is our correct answer. Mary feels very satisfied when she's taking care of the garden. Where do I get that from? It says here that she feels increasingly pleased when she's working and tearing up the weeds and whatnot. So this is just, again, just a simple example for illustrative purposes, just to give you an idea of a relatively easy to medium text for the new digital SAT, and how you can use strategy and how you can be familiar with the types of decoys so that you don't fall. Okay, let me give you some other stuff here. Let's go to, we'll skip over this. Let's go to this over here. We'll just do one more little reading passage here. So I'm gonna, again, read this out loud. And then I'll show you other types of questions. The following text is adapted from Edith Nesbit's 1906 novel, The Railway Children, which I'm sure all of you have read. Mother did not spend all her time in paying dull visits to dull ladies and sitting dully at home waiting for dull ladies to pay visits to her. She was almost always there, ready to play with children and read to them and help them to do their home lessons. Besides this, she used to write stories for them while they were at school and read them aloud after tea. And she always made up funny stories or funny pieces of poetry for their birthdays and for other great occasions. So, according to the text, what is true about Mother? And that's why I said to you that when I'm reading a work of fiction, an excerpt from a short story or a novel on the new digital SAT, I am laser focused on trying to figure out as much as I can about the main character, about the protagonist, right? I'm trying to figure out, one, what are his or her or their primary traits? Is this somebody who is obstinate, someone who's generous, someone who's smart, someone who's athletic? And I'm also trying to figure out what this person likes to do, right? And what does this person like to do? Write stories for kids, read them out loud, etc., right? So I'm thinking about that while I'm actually in the process of reading. So let's do this one together. According to the text here, and I know some of you have asked questions about the new digital test, which I'll get to momentarily. According to this text, what is true about Mother, right? Look at choice A. Choice A is actually the opposite of the truth, right? Choice A can be directly contradicted right over here. She wishes that more ladies would visit her. No, she certainly does not, right? Notice that it's directly contradicted by the source text. Let's look at choice B. Some students choose B. Some students might choose B because it does mention birthdays here. But is there any indication that birthdays are her favorite special occasion? No. Choice B is a prime example of a type of trap answer that I mentioned before called SGNM, which stands for answers that sound good, but are not mentioned whatsoever in the passage. Is it entirely possible that birthdays are mother's favorite special occasion? Sure, that seems totally logical to me. Is there any indication of that, explicit indication in the text? None, none whatsoever. Therefore, I can't pick it, right? So now let's look at these two choices here. She creates stories and poems for her children, or reading to her children is her favorite activity. So what do you guys think here? What do you think, C or D? And I'm going to give you guys a minute or two. Good, very good. And again, I'm just reading a few names out loud. Davy and Adashri. And by the way, if I mispronounce any of your names, I sincerely apologize. And Jack, yes, this one here is going to be choice C, right? She creates stories and poems for her children, which we can see over here, right? Is it possible that reading to her children is her favorite activity? Sure, that's entirely possible. Just like choice B is entirely possible. Is there any evidence for that? No. So let me give you guys just bear with me a little time here. I'm going to give you a few other types of questions. So we've talked a little bit about reading. Let's go to another type of verbal question that you're going to get. And I'm going to teach you how you can use game theory to very quickly eliminate answer choices. So let me go back here. And as I mentioned at the beginning, on the current version of the SAT, the current test, right? You've got one reading section at the start of the current exam, followed by writing and language. And writing and language for the current test consists of grammar and editing and rhetoric questions. Questions about basically grammar concepts like subject verb agreement and editing skills. On the new SAT, on the digital SAT and PSAT, what the College Board has done is it has fused those two sections together. So now you've got two verbal sections, both of which feature questions relating to reading comprehension and questions dealing with vocabulary and language, and questions that are assessing your knowledge of English grammar. So let's look at some of those questions together, and let's talk about strategy. So one of the most common types of questions that you're going to encounter on the new SAT, the new digital SAT, are questions that test you about what's known as syntax and punctuation. Syntax is really just a fancy term for sentence structure. And punctuation are those squiggly little marks, right? Like semicolons and colons and commas and dashes and periods, etc. So let's look at this one here. This is the number one type of question that you're guaranteed to encounter whenever you take the new digital SAT and PSAT. Number one type of question, okay? So this reads, I'll make this a little bit larger. Beatrix Potter is perhaps best known for writing and illustrating children's books, such as The Tale of Peter Rabbit. But she also dedicated herself to mycology, the study of blank, more than 350 paintings of the fungal species she observed in nature, and submitting her research on spore germination, sounds fascinating, to the Linnean Society of London, right? So this question here, and we don't have time to go into a whole lesson on independent clauses and dependent clauses, but this one here, the correct answer here is going to be choice D. And again, this is a prime example of a type of grammar question that you're going to encounter. And I'm going to, again, read this out loud with choice D being inserted there. And then I'm going to give you a really cool strategy that you can use to game the test, a very cool shortcut. So first, let me read this out loud with the correct answer plugged in. Beatrix Potter is perhaps best known for writing and illustrating children's books, such as The Tale of Peter Rabbit. But she also dedicated herself to mycology, the study of fungi, producing more than 350 paintings of the fungal species she observed in nature, and submitting her research on spore germination to the Linnean Society of London. Why is this one choice D? Well, in a nutshell, because all of this here, and some of you may not know what I'm talking about here, and that's okay. You can study this over the summer, but everything leading up to the word fungi or fungi, depending on how you want to pronounce it, all of that is what's known as an independent clause. In essence, it's a group of words that can stand on its own as a full sentence. Everything starting with the word producing, is what's known as a dependent clause, right? Therefore, you have to separate those two portions of text with a comma. So some of you might be sitting at home thinking, dude, I have no idea what you're talking about. And some of you might be thinking, okay, I get this. Regardless of which camp you fit into, regardless of whether that makes sense to you because you understand independent clauses and dependent clauses already, or whether you don't, and you have to learn that over the summer, let me give you an important strategy here for process of elimination. When you take this test, again, I promise you, you're going to see a lot of questions like this one here. And when you take this test and you see two answer choices here like A and B, and one of those answer choices features a semicolon, and the other answer choice features a period, and there's no other difference between those two answers, no other difference other than one features a semicolon and the other answer features a period, I promise you, not 99% of the time, but 100% of the time, those two answers will be incorrect and you can eliminate them immediately. Why is that the case? Because even though the semicolon and the period, there's a stylistic difference between the two, functionally, they are identical. Both the semicolon and the period separate what are known as independent clauses. And don't worry about that so much right now. What I want you to consider is that you can usually get rid of, if you know what to do and how to take this test, for math and reading and writing, you can often eliminate 50% of your answers, 2 of the 4, very, very quickly if you know certain strategies and shortcuts. So, bearing that in mind, so let's think about what you just learned here, right? Without even seeing the text on the left, without even seeing it, I can get rid of choices A and B, because as soon as I see 2 choices, one of which features a semicolon and the other one features a period, I can eliminate those answers immediately. They will never, ever be correct because they are functionally interchangeable. So bearing that in mind, here's another question, right? I am intentionally not showing you anything here on the left side. I'm not showing you any of the text that's on the left side of the screen. You guys tell me, without any clues whatsoever, without any text on the left, what are 2 choices based on the strategy that we just learned that you can eliminate immediately? What are the 2 choices you can get rid of right away? You guys tell me. Very good. Yeah, you can immediately get rid of choices C and D. And again, and I say this as a former English major, there's a significant stylistic difference in terms of usage between semicolons and the period mark. They're stylistically different. But the new digital SAT and PSAT don't test stylistic differences. They only test functional differences when it comes to grammar questions. So again, this is just one example of many, 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 many examples. When you have a difference, right? When you have a semicolon period, those are interchangeable. I'll show you just one more type of question here, and then I'll get into some other stuff, and then we'll wrap in about 10 minutes. So let me show you an example of a very hard question. I'm going to give you guys a challenge. This here is an example of a very, very difficult grammar question on the new digital SAT and PSAT. I'll read this one out loud and you guys can try it if you like. This is a hard question. A lot of students will miss this. So this reads, in 1937, Chinese-American screen actor Anna May Wong, who had portrayed numerous villains and secondary characters, but never a heroine, finally got a starring role in Paramount Pictures' Daughter of Shanghai, a film that blank expanded the range of possibilities for Asian images on screen. So which choice completes the text so that it conforms to the conventions of standard English? I'll give you guys a moment here. Again, we're almost done. I want you guys to bear with me for another 10 minutes or so and take a guess on this one. This is a very tricky, hard question. What do you guys think for this one here? What do you guys think? And if you're not sure, by the way, you can type in IDK for I don't know. And if you're not sure, you can also guess 2 answers. You can say I'm stuck between, 2 of the answer choices, but let me know what you guys think. So a lot of students for this one here, and some of you might be a little bit reluctant to guess, which is totally understandable. So a lot of students here will say either B or C. A lot of students will say B or C, okay? B is your number 1 answer choice, okay? And I'm gonna give those of you who chose B an opportunity to perhaps reconsider your answer. This is a very hard question. So here's how I'm going to explain why this one is actually not choice B and it's choice C. This is a hard question. I want one of you to please type in into the chat the name of a celebrity, a movie star, somebody who's obviously really well known, and a movie that movie star has starred in. So just give me the name of a movie star and the name of a movie that person has starred in, and I will use that for illustrative purposes. Okay, and I will perhaps use Gone with the Wind. I want to see if there's another choice, although that's a great book and a great movie. Although obviously, as you know, somewhat controversial in today's era. So okay, we're going to use Robert Downey. We're going to use Robert Downey Jr. and Avengers Endgame. Really entertaining movie. Okay. By the way, Jack, I really like your suggestion. Great movie, Fight Club, and also really interesting book. Edward Norton, amazing actor. So let's use Robert Downey Jr. here and Avengers Endgame as our example. So I'm going to give you guys a choice here. All right. I'm going to give you two options. I'm going to type these into the chat. So let me do option number one. And I want you guys to tell me which one of these options is correct. And I'm going to abbreviate Robert Downey Jr.'s name as RDJ. Okay. Okay, so I want you guys to tell me which option is correct. We've got option one, Robert Downey Jr.'s movie, comma, Avengers Endgame, comma, is entertaining. Or option number two, RDJ's movie, Avengers Endgame, is entertaining. Most students will think option one is correct. It's not. There's a little tiny nitpicky rule in English grammar, and you can Google this if you like. I would suggest if you want to read more about this, you can Google what I'm typing in here. There's a rule in English grammar called the name identifier rule that the brand new SAT tests, and I was surprised to see it among the very hardest grammar questions. And if you want to read a great article that explains it, you can Google New York Times name identifier rule, and it'll come up, and there'll be a piece about it. So here's the deal. Let me explain to you why option two is correct and why choice C is correct. When you surround someone's name, like this person here, when you surround someone's name with commas, or the name of a book, or the name of a movie, or the title of a song, what you are actually implying is that movie, or that book, or that person is the only one of its kind. So if I say to you, Robert Downey Jr.'s movie, comma, Avengers Endgame, comma, is entertaining, well, number one, you would think it's weird that I'm saying the comma out loud. But in addition to that, that would actually be implying that Robert Downey Jr. has literally only been in one movie his entire career, and that movie is Avengers Endgame. Well, we know that's not the case. We know that Robert Downey Jr. has been in multiple movies, not just Avengers Endgame. And if I surround the title of that movie with commas, the implication is he's only been in one movie, which is incorrect. Just to give you one other simple example, right? So my wife's name is Allison. Okay. My wife's name is Allison. If I said to you, my wife Allison is a former attorney, or my wife Allison used to be an attorney, right? Would I write this? Which one of these options would I write? And then we'll go back to this question. I promise we'll be done in a few minutes. Right? In that case, I would not use option number two. If I said to you, my wife Allison is a former attorney, and I didn't bracket her name with commas, then the implication would be that I'm polygamous and I have multiple wives. And my wife, who's probably about 10 feet away, would not be psyched about that, right? Or maybe she would, I have no idea, but I don't think so, right? So in that case, I only have one wife. Therefore, I would actually bracket and surround her name with commas. So for this one here, which is among the very hardest types of questions that you'll encounter, for this one here, okay, what you have here is choice C. Why? Because we can safely assume that this person whose name I'm not quite sure how to pronounce, but Steina Chin, we can assume very safely that she was not the only film critic in the entire world in 1937. Therefore, this one is choice C. And this is an example of a very hard type of question. Again, I would encourage you, if you really want to learn about what's called the name identifier rule, You can Google New York Times, comma, name identifier rule. Anyway, I'm going to talk for just like 5 minutes about math because I didn't really have a chance to get to that. My apologies for those of you who are just dying to do algebra over the summer. So in terms of math, here are just some simple pieces of advice just for 5 minutes before we wrap up. I will tell you, by the way, that there's not as much of a disparity. There's not as much of a difference between the math that's tested on the current SAT and the math that's tested on the new digital SAT and PSAT. There's a far greater overlap between the math on the current test and the math on the new test, okay? So that's good news for those of you, especially who've maybe already done some prep work. In terms of how you can improve, you absolutely want to strengthen your foundation in geometry and algebra. Just as with the current version of the test, there is no advanced math on the new digital SAT. There's no calculus, there's no linear algebra, there's very, very little algebra 2 and trigonometry, just a smattering. I'm not saying that the math on the new test, on the digital SAT is easy. I'm not saying that whatsoever. It can be quite challenging. What I am saying is that the underlying concepts, the concepts that underlie the questions are not terribly difficult. So chances are, if you're in 10th grade and you're going to 11th grade, you probably already have, depending on what math you're in, you've probably already mastered most of the concepts that you need to know. Now, I'm not saying that the math is easy. I'm not saying it's easy, but I am saying that the concepts themselves are not that hard. Let me show you maybe an example of what I mean. So this, to me, this question here very much exemplifies why so many students despise the math portions of the SAT. This is a prime example of a question that is not hard, but nonetheless is tricky. Why is this question tricky? Because so many students will fail to answer the final question, which is x minus 1, right? Why is this question number 21 and not number 1? It's nothing to do with the concept. This question here is testing absolute value, which is relatively straightforward. Some of you may have even done absolute value back in middle school. So this question here is not a hard question because the underlying concept is difficult. This question, this math question here is difficult because so many students are trained from school to solve for X, to solve for a variable, and then they forget to answer the final question. So one of the best ways that you can minimize careless mistakes on the new digital SAT, is to always take a split second and make sure that you're answering the final question. And the other thing that I want to highlight, again, we only have a couple of minutes here, but the other thing that I want to highlight in terms of math, let me just jump ahead here. I'll actually go past this. Actually, I'll just stay on this for a moment. Just bear with me, guys. The other thing that you'll want to do is you'll want to make sure that you master the math concepts and topics that frustratingly are tested on the SAT, but are not typically taught in Montgomery County. So on the page here, on this slide, we have some of those concepts. So you have in problem solving and data analysis, you have concepts like standard deviation and frequency and margin of error that unless you've taken like psychology or AP stats, you might not have encountered. In terms of advanced algebra, you have exponential growth and decay, radicals and rational exponents, circle theorems, etc. Again, some of you may have done this, others perhaps have not. But more than anything else, there's two things I want you to take away from this presentation when it comes to math. I want you to become a careful reader. I always tell students for the new digital SAT in particular, the SAT calls them math modules, but they might as well be called reading modules too. You have to be a very, very careful reader. And part of being a careful reader on the new SAT and PSAT is training yourself to look out for certain key terms in word problems, adjectives like, or superlatives, like least, greatest, different, other, previous, even, odd, consecutive. So many times students will miss questions for math that they understand how to do because they have simply overlooked a key term like the word different or previous. So part of doing well on the math portions of the new PSAT and SAT is going to be training yourself to be a careful reader. And then perhaps the most important advice that I want to give you on the digital SAT and PSAT is to learn how to be strategically lazy. I want you guys to learn how to be strategically lazy. What I mean by that is I don't mean being lazy like, oh, I don't want to do something. When I say be strategically lazy, What I mean is, I want you to learn how to do the least amount of work humanly possible to get the right answer. I want to teach you, or someone else can teach you, or you can learn on your own, how to checkmate every single type of math problem that you're going to encounter using the fewest possible number of moves. Why is it important to be strategically lazy? Because of the time constraints of the exam. So to me, it's not just a matter of getting the right answer. It's about getting the right answer in the least amount of time. And what I will tell you, and we don't have time to illustrate this now, but what I will tell you is that some of the very hardest questions on the new digital SAT and PSAT are actually among the easiest questions to crack if you simply know what to do. And you can always use the multiple choice answers to your advantage. In fact, one of the things that I teach is how to let the test do the work for you. Instead of solving immediately, how to glance at the answer choices and very, very quickly figure out what the correct answer is, which is something you could never do on a math test at school. So anyway, we'll go past that. So we'll jump past this just in the interest of time here. But I will just very quickly, we'll stop here at 11:30, and I want to thank you guys for being so generous with your time. But let me just say this. I often get asked, why is there a disparity between my grades at school and my performance at school and my score on exams like the SAT and the PSAT? And to me, there's really 6 reasons, and they're all important to consider. You have the inherent pressure of taking a high stakes exam. And my goal, if you do anything with me, or if you study on your own or with another firm, whatever you wind up doing, the greater familiarity that you have with the test, the less pressure and anxiety that you will feel. I promise you that's the case. If you take a prep course with me, a lot of doing well and not feeling that pressure will come from the confidence of saying, you know what? I'm not going to see anything this morning that I don't know how to handle. There are going to be no surprises this morning. I'm going to march into the test having a game plan for every type of reading text, every grammar question, every math problem, algebra, geometry, what have you. So one of the best ways to really get past that anxiety is to desensitize yourself to it by taking practice tests and knowing exactly what you're going to do. That way you don't have to worry about the unknown. There's no mysteries or surprises on the morning of the test. As I said before, as I really tried to emphasize, you've got to practice no matter what. A lot of students don't do as well because they haven't developed that muscle. They haven't trained their brain to be able to think for a few hours at a time. Lack of familiarity with some of the more sophisticated concepts and topics tested on the SAT, such as dangling participles and the name identifier rule, which we looked at a few short minutes ago, and standard deviation in math. Not knowing how to handle tricky questions, not hard questions, but tricky questions that intentionally steer students toward incorrect answer choices. This is a big one. No matter what you do to prepare, whether it's with me, someone else, or just on your own using free resources, it is imperative that you gain insights from your own mistakes. I would strongly recommend that you keep a journal of all of the questions that you miss, so that toward the end of your preparation, no matter what you do, you can use that to review those mistakes and you can gain insights from them so that you don't make those same mistakes on the actual test when it counts. And then finally, we have lack of organization. You always want to have some sort of blueprint, some sort of organization or timeline that helps you to build knowledge and momentum and confidence leading right up into the test. So if you are interested, let me just jump ahead here. And then I'll give you guys a few minutes to ask questions. If you are interested in taking a course with me this summer, this is my contact info. You can just email me at jared@learntheplaybook. And by the way, if you want a free consultation, or if you just have questions that you didn't get a chance to ask during this presentation, I and my colleagues are happy to chat with you free of charge, whether you're a student or a parent. But I will give you guys a few minutes here. I want to again thank MCPS and Kate Hield at BCC for giving me the opportunity to participate. But if you guys have any questions whatsoever, I will stay on for a few minutes and you can ask them in the chat, and I will be more than happy to answer those questions. So.
Thank you so much, Jared. This has been great.
And I think somebody had asked a question before. Will this year's juniors take the digital SAT or so that's really up to you. Most of the rising juniors, most rising 11th graders will take the digital SAT. However, if you're someone who you feel that you can tackle the existing version of the exam, the lengthy text passages don't daunt you in any way that intimidate you, you could theoretically wrap all of this up by December of this year. But I will be honest with you in that most students are not going to attempt to do so. That's your call. That's your call. Let me see if there's any other question here. I don't know if there are, or Kate, if you or Gail or anyone else has any questions, I'm happy to field them.
I think I'm good. Thank you so
Okay,
much.
so thank you guys very much. Yeah, thank you very much. I really appreciate it.